All right, everybody, welcome to the June Facilitation Master Class. The topic that we're going to be exploring today is how to create and hold a brave container for transformation, or a brave space for transformation to occur. This is the first pillar in the framework that I have created called transformational facilitation. And so to me, transformational facilitation goes beyond just leading a workshop or just leading a training, and actually having the people that leave our events, trainings, retreats, and workshops different, right? The idea of transformation is that there has been some sort of change that has occurred. And so as I have reflected on my 15 years of experience as a facilitator, leading wilderness, being a wilderness guide and leading 21-day backpacking trips, to working in higher education in an administrative role and student mentor role, to leading my own live events and retreats, I've really created this framework to help amazing people like you who are facilitators of trainings, workshops, your own events, to have a guide, to have a framework to help you deliver the transformation that I know you're committed to, right? And so this is a class specifically on the creating and holding a brave container, and we'll talk all about what that means. But I just want to ask you all, like, what inspired, and this is like the engagement part, because if we were all in the same room together, I wouldn't just be talking at you for an hour, because that is not facilitation. So what I'd love to hear from you before we dive in today is, what inspired you to show up today? What inspired you to take an hour of your time to hang out with me? You can either unmute yourself and share verbally, or you can write in the chat box. Both are great options. So what inspired you to be here? And is there anything in particular you're hoping to get out of our class today, learn today? Elise, it looks like you unmuted yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Cool. Welcome. I'm really glad I get to attend one of these. It's never worked out.
Yeah, so glad you're here.
We have like lunch spread out everywhere, but my coworker Michelle and I are here, and next week we are kicking off a company-wide training that we're facilitating called Crucial Conversations through Final Smarts out of Utah, and we'll be rolling it out to all 140 of our staff. And it's an intimate conversation, and we're prepped with training and resources, but how do we, I want to get re-engaged with walking into that training on Tuesday. What are some things that I can bring in to set the tone from the beginning? Because we're leading with our peers and our friends, and our executive leadership is the first one. So we're playing a game right off the bat.
Yeah. So building that trust and rapport with people, especially when you're diving into heavier or more intense conversations, and really taking the time to set the stage for what guidelines and what expectations you have for people to show up, so that people can so that you're creating, again, we're going to talk about what is the difference between a safe space and a brave space later on. But really, so much of this is setting the tone, right? From the very beginning, so that people trust you and they're willing to go there and have these sometimes difficult conversations with each other. So thanks for being here, Elise. I'm so glad that you were able to make it live. Awesome. So I just want to read some of these other ones. Monica, is that how you say your name? I always feel like I say it wrong. But always here, ready for new knowledge. I love that. Sharing the importance of a brave space over a safe space. So Betsy's curious to hear a little bit more about that. We're going to dive into that today. And yeah, I like that Mary is here because Erin has shared some good words about me, which I appreciate. And just ways to tackle or to look at having open and honest reflection of the way our teams work together. I love that, right? And so I know that you are all in this room, I'm imagining, because, number one, you have a message to share. Like Elise was saying, we have this amazing content to share. And how do we set the tone for that? How do we set the stage? I also know that you're here because you want to create transformation and not just deliver information, right? I've said this before, but I feel like we are moving out of the age of just information and people passively absorbing content and into the age of transformation and integration, right? For at least leading these crucial conversations, it's like you don't want just people to know what a crucial conversation is, but how to have one, right? And inviting them to ask like, well, how are they going to apply that and integrate that into their life? Because that's where the magic happens. It isn't just that they know what it is intellectually, but they feel emotionally invested and connected to you as the facilitator, to the knowledge that you're sharing, but also the space that you're holding and creating for them to connect with each other, which allows that integration to happen throughout the experience. And so that's what we get to dive into today. I like to, model the way. And so I have 3 simple community agreements for our time today. One is to be present. I know that there's probably tons of emails or phone calls or other things you could be doing right now. But again, the more present we are, the more that we get out of it. To be open is the second one. So some of you have been facilitating for years. Some of you are newer to facilitation. And the thing that I love about facilitation is there's always something new to learn, right? And so I invite you to listen for the golden nugget that you need to hear, and that everyone here is probably going to walk away with something different, and that's okay. But I know that you're here because you're open and willing to learn and grow. You wouldn't be here otherwise, right? You'd be doing something else with your time. And then the third one is to be engaged, right? Like I said this at the beginning, it's way more fun, when I'm doing the interactive questions, use the chat box. I love to hear from people, and we'll have time for some Q&A at the end if there are questions that come up. So I invite you to have a journal, a pen, a Google Doc open, however you want to take notes. I'm going to do this sans PowerPoint. I was trying to put one together, and I just last time the technology didn't work out so well. And so we're just going to rock it out like we were in a live workshop together, but we're all in our places across the world. We have Canada, and where are you from? Sweden, Switzerland, Monica? I forget. Or I don't know. You're from not the United States. What's that? Slovenia. We have Slovenia in the house. How freaking cool is that? So raise your hand if you have attended all 4 master classes. I know that Jan is here. Betsy's here. Awesome. We got some and then Aaron, how many people have attended 3? We got Aaron in the house. What about 2 master classes? All right. And then who's first time here? First time here. Awesome. Well, for those of you, whether it's your first time here, whether it's your 4th master class, my invitation, my hope is that you get that golden nugget that you need in order to hold and create these brave spaces for transformation. Because the fun part about teaching and training leaders is I know that you're going to go out there in the world and have an even bigger ripple effect with, Elise, I'm super excited to hear about how your crucial conversations go and all of the workshops and events that you're doing. And I really my mission is to support people just like you, to up-level your skills, to feel like you are part of a community of other people, other facilitators who get this, and who can support your ongoing growth. And so at the end of this class, I'm going to invite you to continue the conversation if you need support specifically around, maybe it's that you have an event coming up and you want to talk with me one-on-one about how to integrate this stuff. Because again, information without integration is not enough, right? And so that's really what I'm committed to, and I'll talk about how to sign up for one of those calls at the end of our time today. But be sure, if you have questions that come up, just write them down. We'll have some Q&A time at the end. Okay, here we go. We're going to dive in. And I always like to start with a question. We started with one question, why are you here and what inspired you to be here? But I would love to hear some thoughts from you in the chat box, or if you want to just talk to us, is why do you all think it's important to, why is the idea of creating and holding a brave space important to you and the work that you do? Because it's just asking that question, why do you think that this topic matters? So I'm curious to hear just a couple thoughts and perspectives from you all about why this matters before I dive into why. I mean, I kind of talked about why I think it matters, but I'd love to hear any thoughts or ideas that you have. Betsy says, you mentioned at previous master classes that transformation is uncomfortable and it requires bravery, right? And I think that that's one of the biggest differences with just like, again, going to a workshop where you can sit passively and being in a workshop that actually changes you in some way. It sometimes means that we have to wrestle with things that are challenging or uncomfortable. So how as facilitators do we hold and create that space for people to experience that magic, you know? Our team needs to form and make it move this along faster. Yeah, so I think that part of it is building that trust and building community so that people can have those open and real and honest conversations that are sometimes uncomfortable. And so we're going to talk about where do we come from? What space in our heart do we come from in that? Growing in any way requires input from others. Honest input, requires bravery. I love that. From a facilitator's perspective, I don't just want to share information. I want them to absorb it so that they can use it in their lives. And leading by example, right? Being like modeling the way, I think is such a huge part of building that trust and rapport, right? And so part of creating and holding a brave space is like the first step is building trust and rapport with your audience. Like, so if you're taking notes, number one is building trust and rapport with your audience, your clients, your community. That can happen in a lot of different ways. It can happen through, I know that Jan posts amazing videos on Facebook and he creates these amazing events, and building trust and rapport is about consistency and reliability over time. And so, for those of you who are leading teams, and if you're leading the same team, one of the big questions is like, do my people trust me? And how am I building that relationship with them over time? Because if I'm one way in this context, and then I'm like, hey, I want to have a brave conversation over here, and there's a gap, it's a lot harder for people to be, the right word, the word that's coming to me is like bought in, but like that's where people are open to going there with you, right? If someone like were to see all of my stuff online and meet me in person or come to a live workshop with me, and then I was like really boring and had no energy and like didn't care that they were there would be a disconnect in that rapport and trust building. Rapport is like, it's like having being able to predict how someone's going to be and how someone's going to show up, and that like I can trust them and that they're reliable. And so that's a huge part of, like I was saying, how do we create that brave space even before people walk in the door? I think that a lot of reasons why people are coming to camp or coming to my live events is because they're like, I trust you. I trust that you are going to take me there. You're not going to leave me there, and you're going to bring me back, and we're going to have this amazing transformational experience together. And so I think that that's a huge part of that front end of how we're connecting with people and how we're communicating with people over time, and just being mindful of that, right? So that's the first piece. And then what I wanted to just address and look at as we continue to move into this content is the idea of holding space. I talk a lot about facilitators really being space holders. So what is that? What does it mean to hold space for someone, right? And it really means creating the container where people can feel heard, seen, and loved is what I use. But if you're in like a more corporate setting, you might want to use like valued, appreciated, right? But it means creating the container where people can truly feel heard, seen, and loved. This idea that when you walk into this space, like everything is going to be okay. And so that's really, really what it means. And if we want transformation to occur, we need people to trust that we can, again, take them there and hold that space for whatever arises. And part of holding space, there's 3 keys that I came up with for holding space. The first key to holding space is being fully present with people. In a world that's constantly, we have buzzing and texting and all these things, and it's so easy to be distracted. The first piece is giving someone all of you. There's a quote that I love, just to make this point even, to dial this in even more and further. The quote is, "Attention is the rarest and greatest form of generosity." Attention is the rarest and greatest form of generosity. When you give people your presence, they feel seen, they feel heard, they trust you, right? You know, how hard is it to trust someone who's like, "Hey, will you tell me your deepest, darkest secrets and let's have a crucial conversation," and you're just like, "No, I'm not going to go there with you." Like, people really want to feel like you got them, right? And part of that is your presence. And again, one of my mantras, presence over perfection. So practicing being present with yourself, with your people in that moment, wherever you're at. The second one is non-judgment. So I think a lot of non-judgment starts with ourselves. It comes down to like self-love and acceptance. People, again, in that feeling, wanting to feel seen and heard, I've talked to so many people about wanting to come to camp, and they're like, "Am I going to make friends? Am I going to meet people?" Right? Like, do I belong here? And will I be judged in some way? And so how we can show up to say, like, all of you belongs here, and that I am committed to transformation, but it doesn't mean that I judge that you're not where you need to be, right? Like, because you're here learning about this stuff, I'm not judging you that you're like not as far along as you should be. I'm just showing up of like, we're in this together kind of space. But it's really important for people to not feel like they're being judged, you know? And especially like Elise with leading this crucial conversations, or this idea of like, oh, someone might be further along, or am I going to say something stupid? Like, is it okay for me to mess up? Is it okay for me to make mistakes here in this space without judgment, without fear? And then the third piece to me is really like letting go of control. And this is like, as facilitators, I think we have to be a little bit open to the mystery, meaning open to whatever shows up, and not like, oh, I wanted to do this activity so that like this would happen, because or like I wanted to have this conversation for this result, versus being able to show up and like just hold that space. And there's a part of facilitation where it's like we have a game plan, and when you get real live humans in a room, you never know what's going to happen. And if we show up wanting to be in control or wanting a certain outcome, we might lose some of the magic that happens when there's a group of people in a room having some crucial conversation or whatever the case may be. So those are the 3 keys to holding space for others. I would love to hear in the chat box below, what is the one that you think that you're really good at? And what's the one that you want to work on? So this is just, again, like everything that I do, I try to spin it back onto you, right? Like I could just say this, and this is the information part, but the transformation part is inviting you to like reflect, okay, I am really good at being fully present, or maybe that's something that I can totally work on. So whether you write that down in your notes or you share it in the chat box, I invite you to consider, what do you just want to acknowledge yourself? Like, hey, I'm actually pretty good at this. And what do I want to work on as far as like what it means for me to show up and hold space? I love seeing what people are working on. Question: if you only have a set amount of time, how do you decide between holding space versus moving on with your material? That's a great question, Kelly. And I think there's a sweet spot, and there's a balancing act that happens in facilitation of knowing what your game plan is and being able to move and guide people through that, but not being like so strict with that you miss some of the moments, some of the magic that can happen. And I think that this is the difference between just delivering content, is that it's a lot more straightforward versus like facilitating an experience where you're combining content with activities, reflection, takeaways, engagement. It takes a little bit more time. And so I think that part of in our planning to not rush people through that is just to allow that within our plan, that if connection, engagement, reflection, and application is important, we need to build that in. But that's a really, really good question. Thanks for writing in the chat about what you're working on and what you feel really confident in. I think it's important to look at like, what do these terms actually mean, right? Like, what does it mean to hold space? And so hopefully that gives you a better sense of what that actually means. So as a facilitator, you get to, in order to hold the space, I was like, did I do this in the wrong order? No, I think it's perfect. It's always perfect, however it unfolds, right? In order to hold space, we need to create the space. So it's like, how do we do that, right? That's what you're all here for. So I'm sure that, raise your hand if you have heard of the idea of setting some sort of community agreements or norms or expectations. They're called something different in different contexts. Okay, so most of us have heard of that. Maybe some of us have facilitated community agreements. And I think that it's one of those things that it's like, oh, do I actually need to have community agreements? Isn't this just like common sense? Everyone should know how to be a good human, right? And I think that I would love to assume that to be true. And I think that we never want to assume that people know how to like show up in these maybe more challenging conversations, and like really addressing that on the front end, building in time and space to facilitate or to set community agreements is a proactive facilitation move. Because if you have community agreements, you have something to draw back on of like this, and really the community agreement concept is like, this is how we're gonna commit to showing up for each other during the time that we have today, right? And setting community agreements can take 1 minute. Like I did it pretty quick on this call because I know that we have a short amount of time, and it could take up to an hour, depending on maybe you're leading a multi-day retreat. And so what I wanted to do is give you some examples of what that could look like. For this one, it was a short call. And so, we didn't spend an hour together setting community agreements, right? So part of like being a good facilitator is knowing how much time to spend on what. But I know that it's important. And I know that those are the 3 that I use most of the time, and we went for it. So if you have like less than 90 minutes with a group, community agreements should take about 1 to 3 minutes. And that would look like choosing 3 or 4 of your own that you really like, that you've either seen done or that will help this group show up. Mine, again, today were be present, be open, be engaged. And then the thing about that is I didn't just say those 3 things. I said what they mean. I explained them. I gave them some context, right? And so, if you have like an ongoing team meeting that you're facilitating, you don't need to recreate this every time. But if you did set community agreements at your staff retreat at the beginning of the year, I invite you to like have that on your agendas, right? Like reconnect with like, how do we want to show up for each other in this space? So if you have 90 minutes or less, taking 1 to 3 minutes with 3 or 4 of your own. If you have like a half day with folks, I think the other piece that I was going to say about this too is, in an ideal world, you want your community agreements to be co-created with your community, with your audience, with your people, whether it's your team or folks that are coming. This can be challenging with 150 people in a room, right? And so I'm gonna address the like large group community agreement thing here in a moment. I'm getting distracted. So we have our less than 90 minute workshop, 1 to 3 minutes, our half day workshop, just asking the group to come up with a list of like, 5 things that they need in order to fully show up. So that's one of the questions that you can ask. Like, what do you need in order to fully show up here today? What do you need in order to thrive in this environment, knowing that we're going to have some crucial conversations? If you have a large group, Post-it notes are really great for this. Just like give everyone one Post-it note and like write down like what's one thing you need in order to thrive. If they're sitting at tables, you can have them share it with each other, and then each table gets like their top one. And then each table is going to report out, here's what we need. We need respect or trust or whatever. But then we don't just want to have a list of like trust, respect, active listening. Like we really want to know, what do you mean by respect? What do you mean by trust? What do you mean by active listening? Really soliciting that. Elise is asking for some more. I found one. I'm going to see if I can find this super duper quick. If you have questions, feel free to throw those in here while I find another example. I think it was in my Facilitate Like a Boss masterclass. I think I put in another example of some quick ones. And asking yourself, like, what do you need as a facilitator in order to fully show up? Okay, so here's another example. I'll just put these in the chats. And I'm gonna just take a moment to check in here, looking at some of these questions. Share some examples of community agreements. Elisa, I'm happy to find some other ones as well and share those with you. When facilitating as part of a conference where people are already being vulnerable, is it necessary to have your own? I would read that. I think that even when I'm part of a conference, it doesn't mean that people know how to show up in my space. Like what they might have gone to another workshop and there was different expectations. And so I think the thing is, we don't need to take long to do it, but it's just about getting everyone on the same page and knowing what to expect from like, this is what you can expect from me, and this is what we can expect from each other. A super fun way to like sign your community agreements, and some people have seen this done before, but sometimes I have people, just put their left hand out in the middle of the circle, take your right hand behind you, and on the count of 3, we're going to sign our community agreement together. 1, 2, 3, and we all sign it. And it's just like this affirmation that we're all on the same page. If you have a smaller group, you can always ask, like, do these make sense? Or does anyone have anything to add? And does anyone have any questions about anything that's on this board? Do I share with the community what I need as a facilitator in order to show up? Laura, that's a really great question. And I think that it's more of like, what do we need as the community agreement part is, what do we need as a community, as a group, to show up fully? I think that you can say, here's what you can expect from me. What you can expect from me is I'm going to show up and be fully present. I'm going to like play full out, and we are going to have a good time. Like that, like you can say like, this is what I expect, or this is what you can expect from me. And I think that's a really good question, and it might depend on the group. But part of naming those community agreements is like, it is a way to address that question that you asked. Like, in order for me to show up fully as a facilitator, I need people to be present, to be open, and be engaged, right? So it's kind of like a win-win. So if you're creating your own, it is asking yourself that question of like, what do I need to thrive? What does this group need to thrive? And part of this is based on like, if you have a history with this group, maybe like, what are the things that get in the way from people playing full out or participating fully? And again, being proactive and addressing that. So those are really, really great questions. Keep them coming. I'm going to try to do my best to answer them as they're coming up, but we will have time at the end for some more Q&A. Okay. So a couple more things on community agreements. What was I going to say? So one of my favorite ones, and this is one to do with a group of like 15 people or less, and you are going to be with them for multiple days. It's called the full value hand contract. And I gave this, not assignment, but one of my facilitation and coaching clients leads these amazing internships in Iceland and all over the world. And they were having a lot of challenges and problems with their students showing up. Sometimes, or like they would want to go out and drink and whatever. And I was like, well, did you set community agreements at the beginning of the week? And they're like, nope. And I was like, well, that might be a good idea. And he just came back from his trip and it was like, oh my gosh, it was like a world of difference just by taking an hour at the beginning of the week to really understand how we're showing up for each other. And I'm gonna show you a picture, so that way when I explain how to do this, it'll make more sense. So this is an example, and this would be like on a big, huge poster board. I printed this out from my computer. Maybe some of you can see like very blurred words, but this is called the community, or the full value hand contract is what I call this. And everyone outlines their hand on this big poster board. And in each finger, they write down one word that represents like, what are you bringing to this group? We all have gifts to share. So this is like appreciative inquiry. This is really about acknowledging like, what are you sharing with this group this week? What skills, what strengths, and people on here, joy, humor, laughter, wisdom, presence, magic, and then on the palm, right, when we close this is like what we want to protect and what we want to keep safe. So maybe this is our fears, this is something we're concerned or worried about that we want to keep safe, or that we're not wanting to reveal about ourselves. So on here, people have vulnerability, people have anxiety, being worried about asking for help, self-doubt, things like that. And then in the middle of all of the hands, you ask the group, what do you need in order to thrive during this retreat, during this event, during this experience? And so people wrote in here, compassion, listening, confidentiality, learning, intention, communication, right? And again, this is like, imagine like 10 people sitting on the ground, like with their hands and with markers and talking about, this is how we want to show up. And they're so invested. And like they created this, right? You didn't just say, here's before Kyle, the guy who leads these trips, he would just be like, he felt like more like a drill sergeant, like, here's what we need you to do, da, 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 versus them getting to say, this is how we want to show up for each other. They're way more bought in. I will hold this up again. And then hopefully you all can see that. I will post this in the Transformational Facilitators group as well for you to see it a little bit more in depth. And then the last piece is, on the outside of the circle, you write, what don't we want in this space? Like, what does not belong here? And so there's a lot of different ways you can do community agreements. I just wanted to give you some of my top ways of how I facilitate that, and just reiterate like the importance of doing it. So I am gonna keep on moving, and if you have any questions about that, either send me or put it in the chat box, or wait until the end, and I'm happy to answer those. So once the community agreements are created, ideally co-created, it is then the group's responsibility to hold themselves and each other accountable, which is nice because it takes a little bit of the weight and the pressure off of you as a facilitator, right? And at the same time, it's like you are also the one to help them hold each other accountable, right? But even just to name it, like, okay, once we create this, sometimes I even ask the question. I said, like, I'll say, after we do this, I'm like, well, whose responsibility is this? Like, whose responsibility is this? And I'll leave it open. And someone will inevitably say, it's our responsibility, And that's, again, way more empowering than me just telling people how I want them to show up, right? So if you are leading like day-long or multi-day retreats, I can't encourage that. That's a great one. And I'm happy to do a write-up of that. I know that there was a lot of instructions. And I'm realizing like, oh, that could be a really great just like PDF. So Right on. Okay, moving forward. Hopefully that was helpful. Let me know if that was helpful. Can I get like a thumbs up on that? And if there's other ideas, I know that this is a room full of amazing facilitators. If there are other ways that you do community agreements or set norms, let me know. I'm always learning and growing myself, so I'm so glad that that was helpful. Yeah, shared leadership is where it's at. All right, I want to make sure we get to this whole safe space, brave space thing, because I know that a lot of people are curious about what that means, and there might be some questions that you have, and I do want to leave some time at the end as well. So how many of you have heard of the term safe space before? Like most people have heard of this term, right? How many of you have heard of the term brave space? Maybe from me or maybe from someone else. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about this today. I think that the safe space term is a term that people use a lot in facilitation. And what I want to do before I go into brave space, I want to acknowledge that it is important for people to feel safe. I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm just saying it's important to also create spaces and places where people feel brave. Because if we're talking about transformation is not always feel safe or comfortable or easy. And I think that I know that I've mentioned this before, but we associate the idea with safety with comfort. And so when people start to feel uncomfortable, then they start to associate I don't feel safe anymore because I'm uncomfortable. Versus if we just say, it's okay to feel uncomfortable in these conversations. That's a normal, we're normalizing that that's a part of the experience. And so really part of creating a brave space for transformation is to create a space where people can take risks, where people can make mistakes, where people can learn, grow, and evolve, and ideally transform. And part of that transformation might not be comfortable, right? It might be really uncomfortable. And I think that, I before I got on here, I was like, I should look up what is the definition of safety? Because I'm super curious. So the definition of safety or of safe is protection from or not exposed to danger or risk, not likely to be harmed or lost. So it's if I say this is a safe space and something feels risky, I'm asking someone to do a privilege walk, or I'm asking someone to have a hard conversation. They're like, I'm out. I don't feel safe. And we can invite everything. There's a term in experiential learning called challenge by choice, right? That we have a choice to choose what level of risk we want to take. But that I always encourage people to be in that growth zone. So I'll do a short comfort zone talk, a 60-second version of the comfort zone, because I know that probably a lot of you have heard of this, but I think that safe space sometimes is about being in our comfort zone. And in our comfort zone, nothing can hurt us, nothing can get us, nothing can impact us, but we're also not really learning and growing in that space. It's just comfortable and it's easy, it's familiar. The next level outside of our comfort zone is called the growth zone, the learning zone. And so that is where the magic happens. And sometimes it's a little uncomfortable to learn something new, or to have a hard conversation, or to be on a challenge course, or whatever it is that you're doing. And then what we don't want is we don't want people to be in what's called the freak out zone or the panic zone, right? But giving people an understanding of the comfort zone, the learning zone, learning or growth zone, and then the freak out zone. And ideally, you're creating experiences where people are in that growth zone, where people are in the learning zone. And that I think just acknowledging this is a space, this is a brave space, and that means that you might be uncomfortable, and to encourage people to push that edge, because that's where the growth happens. That's where the magic happens. And so I looked up the definition of brave, and it says, ready to face and endure, showing courage. Right? It's I have the courage to show up fully present and to engage and to be open, even if it's uncomfortable, even when it's hard, and to not shy away from that knowing that transformation is on the other side of when we take those risks. You know, when I was 19 years old, I went on a 50-day outward bound course. I spent 50 days in the woods with people I didn't know. And was it risky? Hell yeah. Did I feel safe? Not really. Did I learn a ton? Hell yeah, I did. And my instructors and my guides allowed me to be courageous and be brave and be bold and practice and make mistakes and learn and grow. And every time I've had mentors and coaches and teachers and facilitators that like show up that way, it is like you're inviting people to show up, and this idea of calling people up and not calling people out. Like, you have more to give. Like, I see more in you, and like being able to challenge people. And like, that's hard to do sometimes as a facilitator, because I don't like making people uncomfortable, but the more comfortable I get being uncomfortable, the easier it is for me to go there with other people. And like Jan said, this is all about inviting people to be what I would call being vulnerageous. Vulnerable plus courageous equals vulnerageous. And then that sometimes things are just a little fun and uncomfortable. So those are some of the fun words that I like to use when it comes. Oh yeah, that Betsy said vulnerageous. Yeah. Fun, comfortable. Yeah. I don't know, funfertable. I've never heard of that one, Jan. So as we kind of move into, I'm just checking my notes today. So give me a thumbs up if that, like the difference between safe space and brave space made sense to you all and how I described that. Okay. Awesome. So I'm going to kind of, again, do my transformational facilitation bit. And I know that I think we've covered a lot in a pretty short amount of time, right? We talked about building rapport, building trust and rapport with your audience. We talked about what does it mean to hold space. And then in order to hold space, we need to create this space somehow. And then the difference between a safe space and a brave space for that transformation to occur. So I would love to hear, and just maybe you can do a 60-second free write, because this was a lot. Write down, there's 2 prompts that I'll give you at the same time, and one might land for you more than the other. Either, what was your biggest takeaway or insight from the time that we've had during this masterclass today? Biggest takeaway or insight? And what is one action that you would want to take as a result? Like, what's something that you see that you could directly implement or incorporate into your trainings, your workshops? Want to give you an opportunity to reflect on that. Reflection helps with application and helps with integration. And so this is, again, a tool that you all can use, you know, before you end your workshops. Like, what'd you get out of that? What was your biggest takeaway? And what are you going to do? So if you are finished writing and reflecting, I would love for you to write it in the chat box, write what your biggest takeaway was, and/or if you're vulnerageous enough to share it with the group verbally, you can also unmute yourself and share, or raise your hand and I will unmute you. I'd love to just hear from a couple people what your biggest kind of insight or takeaway was from what we covered today. And I know that many of you have heard this metaphor before, but as people are finishing up their thoughts and reflection, I am a sailor. I love sailboats, and the idea of asking you what your biggest takeaway is, and not just what your takeaway was, but like how will you apply that, is the idea of a 1-degree shift, right? So the idea of the 1-degree shift, or the metaphor, is if you're on a sailboat and you change the course on your sailboat just 1 degree, over the course of hundreds of thousands of miles, you can end up in a completely different place. And so even though relating that to today's class, even though I shared a lot of information with you, what's like the question that I always like to ask is like, what's the one thing that you could do differently that would make the biggest difference for you in your facilitation and your delivery of your workshops, that you can integrate and apply? So I'll just read a couple. Oh yeah, Laura, do you want to share? I like it when people want to share.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This is awesome. I'm like pretty new to this facilitation, like facilitator word. And I think that for me, the biggest takeaway is with the community agreement, because I work with girls, teenage girls, and sometimes it's really hard for me to, they trust me after, but it takes a long time. So I think that creating, that will help a lot in creating that safe space and for them to feel like they can say anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Just doing that on the front end. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just still thinking about what I can implement. But like right off the bat, I'm like, I'm going to create an exercise that like, I really love what you did with the hands. And I think that because I'm an artist and I do art with them. So I think that something like that could really get us on the right foot from the beginning. So thank you.
I love that. Awesome. Thank you. That makes my heart so happy. Thanks for the work that you do with those girls.
Yeah.
Appreciate you. Biggest takeaway, calling people up, not calling people out. That is so huge, especially if you're a facilitator. It's like, how do we hold space for people's like highest and greatest good? And that's like energetically always where I'm coming from. And when I'm calling someone up, I'm not like pointing out their flaws. I'm just saying like, oh, you have more, in you to give. So a lot of people liked that. That's awesome. Betsy said that as well. Just reflecting on how much I enjoyed camp. Yes, last year, camp. Yes. Coming back? Who's coming to camp? Who's coming to camp? For those of you who don't know this, I run an adult summer camp called Camp Yes here in Portland. If you're interested in coming, let me know. Maybe I might have like a little discount for people that joined these master classes. And so, yeah, let's see what else people said. That it's a brave space for me, awkward, fun, visceral, and memorable, right? So that's the idea with transformational facilitation, is creating like memory-worthy experiences, like experiences that you won't forget. In this day and age where, again, there's so much information, I think that people are really hungry for meaning, purpose, memorable moments, and where people feel like I always say that people are looking for something to believe in and to belong to. And so creating creating and holding that container, it's like, hey, you matter here. Your voice matters here. Your perspective matters here. I see you. I hear you. I love you. I accept you. Like, let's do this together, right? Realize that my understanding of safe space is more under the brave space definition, to be safe, to be vulnerable and uncomfortable. Yeah, so they can be similar, and we might use different words to describe that. I love that. Well, if there's more takeaways or more 1 degree shifts that you want to add to the chat box, feel free to do so. I do want to invite you, the folks that are watching this live, and there was a lot of people. We had almost 50 people sign up for this class. There was a lot of people that couldn't make this live. Hopefully they're watching the recording later. I'm looking at you. I'm seeing you. Is that I would love to, like I said at the beginning, as I put these facilitation master classes together, I realized like there is so much to being a facilitator, right? And it's one thing to have this information, but it's another thing to be able to apply it and integrate it specifically to your own live events, workshops, retreats, whatever it is that you're leading. So what I would love to do is I'm going to find the link here, because this is always the fun part. I'm like, where's all my things here? Is to invite you to have a facilitation breakthrough call with me. And the thing is, like, this thing's free, and it's just because I love you and I want to support you. And I am going to put the link in here. I have the World Domination Summit coming up. I'm going to a wedding next week, but I've blocked off some time Friday, tomorrow, Monday, and Tuesday. specifically, you know, Elise, you have your training coming up. If you want to like get on the phone and like jam out, how are you going to apply this stuff? That's what that is for. That time is for you. And in order to just have a one-on-one conversation of like, okay, how do we apply this to our team meetings? Or how do I apply this to my workshops? So that's what that call is designed for. All you have to do is click on there and sign up for a time that works best for you. And I do have a retreat coming up, a transformational facilitation retreat that I am super duper jazzed about. It's going to be on the Oregon coast. It's going to be an all-inclusive experience at this like epic Airbnb place that I found with farm-to-table dinners and all sorts of magical coastal adventure experiences. And so if that is something that you're interested in, the price for that is going to be $9.97 until the end of the month. And then it'll go up to $14.97. So, and that's all-inclusive, 4 days, 3 nights. It's October 4th through the 7th. And there's 10 spots available and 3 are taken. So that means there's 7. How many is that? If you're interested in like being in a house with like rad facilitators for a weekend and like learning more and diving more into this, I would absolutely love to have you there and be honored. Honored to have you there. I'm just going to put the link in the chat box below, and then I want to open it up. Let's do this real quick. And then I did pretty good on time today, which I feel really good about. That is the information, a little bit more information about the retreat. If anyone's interested, whew, man, I'm like all fired up from these master classes. They're so fun. But we got 7 minutes for Q&A. And if anyone has, you want to know when the next master class is, huh? Getting ahead of yourself. I'm just kidding. Thanks for asking. I will put the link in for the master class. Let me see if I can find it while people are coming up with their amazing questions. Based on anything that we talked about today, feel free to let me know. Just getting this link for the next masterclass, which is on the second pillar, which is all about facilitating a strong sense of belonging and community. So that is the link to the next masterclass. These masterclasses are free. They're my gift from me to you because I love y'all and you're the best because you're transformational facilitators. And my mission is to support your awesomeness. And we do have a Facebook community that you can join and be a part of. And I'm trying to figure out ways to make that even more helpful and sharing tips and trainings and resources and opportunities for you all. So with that, are there any questions that you had about anything that we talked about today? Building trust and rapport, community agreements, brave spaces. As I drink some fizzy water. Anyone? Let's see, biggest takeaway. Kelly says her biggest takeaway, I think I'm realizing that I prefer multi-day once a week over quarter. Okay. Yeah, dig deeper with people over time to build rapport and get to know them better. That's awesome. Describing that safety can be uncomfortable, and that's okay. What if you expect all introverts at your workshops? So yeah, that's a thing. I think that what I tend to say about introverts is that I think that there's a misconception that introverts don't want to connect with people. I think that I think part of facilitation is creating a space that is even safe enough for the most introverted people to connect. And all they need, I call it's the power of a prompt and the power of Post-it notes. This is the thing, because when you have Post-it notes, you can allow people to process things in different ways. So if we're doing community agreements, maybe I know everyone's introverted or lots of folks are, I would have each person write down what's one thing you need in order to thrive, and take your Post-it note, put it on the wall, and let's come up with the themes, right? So I think introverts sometimes need a little bit more reflection time. So providing that reflection time, doing partner, like pair share activities, and then having someone report out. And so maybe the more introverted person doesn't want to be the one to report out, but their voice still got to be heard, if that makes sense. And I think that a lot of people, even extroverted people, it's the power of a prompt. Like, I think that genuinely people want to connect. If they're coming to a live workshop, they want to connect. As a facilitator, you're just figuring out what's the best way to invite them to do that, right? I think that one of the things that I see too many facilitators do is, and I had to learn this like the hard way, I always wanted to hear from everyone. And I realized like not everyone wants to speak in a room full of 20 people. Versus it's more important for them to hear each other and to be heard by each other than it is for me to hear everyone. So doing pair shares, getting into groups of 3, doing smaller group work, having opportunities for reflection to say, we're going to do a 60-second free write. All of that really allows, it's like you're just engaging multiple different perspectives and learning styles and acknowledging that we all process information differently. Does that help? Elise, thanks for being here. She had to go. Anybody else? Well, we got 3 more minutes. We really powered through all of this stuff. It's so good. So happy. Any other thoughts, reflections, insights, takeaways, or how you're going to apply this in your work? Are people just waiting for other people to ask questions? Maybe. Any questions about the breakthrough call or the retreat that's coming up? I can answer those questions. I'm looking at my notes and I'm surprised. I'm like, wow, I think I covered everything, which is so great. All right. Well, it doesn't seem like there's any other questions, but if you get off this call and you do have questions, oh, Mary asked a question. I'm just going to put my email address in here in case people don't have it, but you should because I emailed everyone today. But this is my email if you have any questions. Can breakthrough call be with multiple folks? Yes. I'm happy to do a conference call with your team. So if you need to chat with your team about what time would work, we can totally do it over Zoom too. I'm happy to do that call over Zoom with multiple people. That's a great question. So check the calendar. If there aren't any times and dates that work for you in the next few days and we need to do it a different day, let me know and we can make that happen. Is it okay to schedule a call and don't have that workshop yet? Yes, that's a great question. So if you are a facilitator and you're in still idea land phase, or you're you haven't launched your event or your live event, your workshop, trainings, retreats, whatever, this call can be designed to help air out and talk through some of those ideas and to help you move forward towards putting that out there. So you don't need to have one, but what if the call could be your breakthrough and that the result of that call could be that you do have a workshop on the calendar? Yeah? All right. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, cool. That is a great question, Monica. Thank you so much for asking that. So yeah, the facilitation breakthrough call is for people that have workshops, trainings, events coming up already, and those who just have ideas and they want to talk through them. They want to get some insight. They want to get perspective. They want to get some feedback on that. Happy to support you. So to honor you all, to honor everyone's time, I am going to close this month's masterclass on creating and holding a brave space. Thank you all so much for joining us this month. I hope you can join us for our next month's masterclass, and I can't wait to see you inside the Transformational Facilitators community online. Talk to y'all soon. Cheers.